Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our very first Request-a-thon. Feel free to throw your cameras on so we can see your beautiful little faces today. This is going to be dynamic and agile, and who knows where we could go. We could end up absolutely anywhere. My name's Nicole Dyson. I'm the CEO and founder of Future Anything, and we love running these live learning sessions because basically we get to talk about stuff that we find really exciting, and a lot of the time I get to bring some really amazing humans that I respect to the conversation. Unfortunately for you today, you have to tolerate just me, but I'm hoping that you will bring some really great energy and questions to the conversation. It can be less about me and more about the collective genius of the room. I want to kick off by just acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we live, work, play, learn, and create. For us at Future Anything, we're headquartered in Brisbane in Meanjin, so it's Yagara and Turrbal land. But to start, I'd love for you to just drop in the chat, who are you? And maybe what land are you joining us from? We have people joining us from all over the country, so it'd be great for you to just introduce yourself really quickly in the chat. And whilst you do that, I'd love to take a second to introduce Dan to the room. He's just joined the Future Anything team as our Director of Professional Learning. And so basically, Dan, you didn't know this, but I'm actually going to make you lead live learning today. No, I'm kidding. I wouldn't just throw you in the deep end. No, definitely not. So yeah, introduce yourself in the chat. Don't be shy. Let us know where you're joining us from around the country or around the world. Sometimes we have a few international people join us at the same time. Excellent. Kat, good to see you, legend. It's been a little while. You keeping well? Awesome. So a couple of conferences ago, it would have been probably last year at the University of Queensland, there was a academic symposium talking about entrepreneurship education. And there was this, I think, 45-minute workshop style opportunity that I had after a panel. And it was a really diverse room. So there was educators in the room, there were academics, both primary school educators and secondary school educators, and obviously academics from all walks of life between business, entrepreneurship, and education in the room. And it was really difficult for me to work out where to kind of angle the session. So I did what has now been dubbed Request-a-thon, which is I asked everybody to think about something that they wanted to know more about, a burning question that they might have, a topic that they were interested in. And I basically just switched between about 16 different slide decks and kind of responded to the topics in question. So what we've done for today is we've brought Request-a-thon to our live learning, because we know that there's lots of burning questions that educators have. And we're going to keep today super responsive and agile and kind of see where the conversation takes us. In order to kind of set us up, I thought it might be helpful for me to frame maybe a little bit of the work that we're doing at Future Anything and a couple of the pedagogy and frameworks that kind of inform our work. And then this might hopefully provide maybe a bit of a provocation in order for you to direct some questions or some curiosities our way, or at least that's the hope. And so bear with me. I'm just going to share a few slides just so that we can, if I do my job correctly, you should now be seeing slides in front of you. Dan will give me a thumbs up if I've managed to nail it. Excellent, go me. So the work that we do at Future Anything probably splits into what I would say the simplest way to describe it is like 3 portfolios. Our flagship program, Activate, is an in-curriculum entrepreneurship opportunity where students go from problem to pitching these cool solutions at our national grand final. Controversially, I say that our grand final is better than Christmas. The children don't necessarily agree, but I think, you know, the topic is definitely up for debate, because in my mind, there's nothing better than seeing passionate teenagers and young people sharing these really creative, innovative solutions to problems that they deeply care about. So that's our Activate program. We also run student workshops, these 1, 2, and 4-day experiences in schools, and we do a big suite of teacher professional development. And that's kind of where I want to stay, is some of the critical elements or moving parts that are driving the work that we're doing in schools and systems around building the capacity of our educators. I think it's of interest to mention that we're a part of an international research project called IDEEC. And so this project is around what they label impact-driven entrepreneurship education. And the C can be for classroom or children, whichever you want to use today. And this project has been co-funded by Erasmus in the European Union, and there's 9 providers involved. And we're the only provider outside the EU that's involved in this particular project. And so this 3-year research project is looking at best practice in what they call impact-driven entrepreneurship education, which in our language in Australia is probably closely referenced to like that social enterprise movement or purpose-led business. So can we support young people to come up with these innovative business ideas that also solve some sort of environmental or social challenge that they feel connected to? Now, the big drivers in this project, we're in year 2 at the moment, is that we have built a framework and some capabilities that sit across, if you're familiar, sit across a couple of European frameworks that are EntreComp, DigiComp, and GreenComp. So these are competency-based frameworks from Europe. And so this project is actually working at the intersection of those 3 competency frameworks. And so we're building the competencies that sit across those 3 most commonly. And then we're building a toolkit that when it's released will be open source for educators to access, that will have a whole suite of tools and activities that you can basically pick up from the website and run in your classroom. We're just about to step into the testing phase of this work. So I'll be asking anybody who's keen to kind of engage in that process over the next couple of weeks. I just want to underpin a little bit of the principles that sit behind what we do. And then while I'm chatting, if you've got some questions that are coming up for you, feel free to start throwing them in the chat because I'll start to then weave the rest of the session around those curiosities. Be gentle with me, everyone. Maybe give me an easy one to start with and then work up to the really complex ones. That way I've got time to Google the answer before we get to the really, really tough ones, or use ChatGPT. I'm kidding, I wouldn't. So what I want to kind of step into is, for us, the work that we do is built around this belief that it's not what you know for our young people today, it's what you can do with what you know that's really critical. And I often tell the story of my year 10 maths teacher who said to me, like, Nicole, you really need to pay attention to this. It's not like you're going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go, except the fact that I do. So what we have to think about is that as educators, sometimes we're operating from the bias of our present, which prevents us from perceiving the world that our young people are going to inhabit in the future. And so we often stay tied to the pedagogy and principles of the present and don't necessarily future-proof our pedagogy or our processes or our curriculum in imagining the future that our young people might hold. And so if we look at all the research that's being developed at the moment, like, some really great research from Learning Creates, around the number of young people that use ATAR to secure their post-secondary pathways. The World Economic Forum's recent release around the skills and capabilities that are trending in work. This is something that I think is really important, is that we need to look at education where we use knowledge as the vehicle to build skills. So how do we use knowledge as a driver? Okay, so our content as a driver to build these critical skills and capabilities that we know our young people are going to need for the future of work. In which case, we're actually privileging the process over the product. Okay, so it's more important that our young people learn how to learn than they learn how to memorize, regurgitate, and be assessed. Okay, because they can Google this content. All right, so how do we teach them the skills and capabilities to be these lifelong learners? And as a company that currently has entrepreneurship as a part of our tagline on our website, what we are really pushing for here is a generation of enterprising thinkers and doers, not a generation of entrepreneurs. Okay, no
Nick's just resetting. She'll be right back. So I thought Nick was kidding when she was going to ask me to take the session. But anyway, here we are. No, just kidding. So Nick will be back in a moment. But if you've got some questions, anything that's that you've come on board today to ask and find out, throw it in the chat. Gives us a chance to have a little bit of a look over it and prepare an answer for you.
Sorry, everybody. There's always one technical issue that happens at some point, and today's the day. So here we are. I was joking about Dan jumping in and leading live learning, but apparently the universe would like to test him. So we're just throwing him in the deep end really here quickly. Thanks for being patient. So I guess what I was trying to capture, just to kind of finish us off before we launch into some questions, is that the work that we do sits at the intersection of three particular pedagogies in our work. So the first piece is project-based learning. And so this relies on the work of PBL Works, which has developed the gold standard for project-based learning. And the reason why we like this is there's 8 parts that lean into building a gold standard project-based learning. And so really what we're trying to focus on here is that just because there's a project at the end does not make project-based learning. And the other thing to consider here is that not every unit should be project-based learning. And so we lean on this framework and draw tools from this process in our work. The second pedagogy that we draw into our work is human-centered design or design thinking, and this is based around the work from IDEO. And what we really privilege in this space is supporting young people to build the capacity to think divergently before they converge in their thinking. So imagine that creativity and critical thinking are sitting on opposite sides of a coin. And in some ways, what we need to develop is this capacity for creative thinking. So looking broadly and widely and looking up before we converge and use our critical thinking lens. And the other element of design thinking that we really like to weave in is how do we create space within curriculum for we know that the nature of the beast is that we do have these assessment instruments, okay, or some sense of measuring in the classroom. How do we actually create space for these assessment instruments to be milestoned, where young people can actually receive feedback, use feedback, apply feedback through a continual iterative process, rather than the transaction of assessment at the moment in many classrooms, which is the case of I give out the task sheet, you give me a draft, I mark the draft, and then you sometimes implement the feedback that I put on the draft, and then you give the final assessment piece back. And so how do we create multiple opportunities for building feedback within a learning journey? And then the last piece of the puzzle in what we do is this focus around entrepreneurial pedagogy. Now, entrepreneurship education is where the entrepreneurial product is the purpose for the learning. Entrepreneurial pedagogy is where the skills and capabilities of thinking like an entrepreneur are actually the focus of the learning journey. So you imagine that entrepreneurship becomes the vehicle for that explicit skill building. Now, in our first 3 years of research, we really focused around 6 capabilities. And we're just moving into our next phase of research, and we're actually focusing on 7 capabilities. So we've done a little bit of splintering in that, and I'll share that slide so that you can see them. initially in the 6 capabilities that we were focusing on, creativity and innovation sat together. But what I found in our research is that innovation and creativity are actually very different skill sets. And then the other learnings that we've had is that curiosity often sits at the center of this skill and capability building. And it is the spark of engagement that actually enables young people to really tap into a learning experience. So we're working off the hypothesis that building a sense of curiosity within a learning experience is actually the linchpin capability for all the others. The other hypothesis that we're working off at the moment, which is quite topical in education, is there's a lot of conversation around how critical agency is for our young people in the classroom. And the work that we're doing at the moment is trying to firm up this belief that agency is the product of confidence in these capabilities. So when young people are confident across these capabilities, then you will actually see them able to take agency and ownership over their learning journey. So it's the product of confidence in the capabilities, not some like mythical unicorn that turns up at feedback time that students can suddenly do. And so how do we focus on building, confident project managers and young people that have an adaptive mindset and are strong, creative and critical thinkers and can communicate their ideas and their feelings and have the ability to create innovative solutions to problems that they care about. And the collision of these capabilities, the product of that is agency. So a lot of you that have worked with us before know that we're data nerds, and so we do a lot of measurement in our work. And so in our Activate program last year, for example, and look, I'll make that one bigger so that everyone can see it a little bit clearly. Last year, we had 5,500 young people in our Activate program, and we measured our young people pre-program in their confidence in the 6 capabilities which we were originally working with. The top line is, do you understand what the capability is? The bottom line is, can you do it? And so each capability is broken down into skills that sit underneath it. So in other words, in order to manage a project, what are the things, the skills that you need to be able to do? And so this is the growth that we saw in last year's Activate program. And so this is a 10-week intervention. Last year, we had 5,500 young people in our Activate program. 1 in 3 of our schools are regional schools. And, I think a third of our schools, well, it's about 50-50 between public schools and private schools. And we have young people from year 3 all the way through to year 12 in the program. So pretty strong diversity. And so what you can see is in a 10-week intervention with targeted capability development within that piece of curriculum, we can see an increase of 5 to 8%. Now, what I'm really curious is if your school is able to privilege a whole school approach to capability building, imagine the growth you could get between 7 to 12. Okay, if you had mapped capabilities across KLAs, and so horizontally across a KLA and vertically across a KLA, across a whole school, what kind of growth can you get? Now, what's super interesting is in the primary space, this is the kind of growth that we get. So if we actually kind of build this work in earlier, we get even more significant growth. So the last kind of slide I want to show you before I kind of jump to some of your questions, so feel free to start dropping them in there as well. I can see that there's a few in there already, is this whole idea that you can't do this work in the classroom if educators are not confident in these capabilities. So what we've also seen is, oh, there's my cursor, that one. This was the confidence pre and post Activate of teachers to deliver these capabilities. So how confident are you to teach these capabilities in the classroom? So what's really interesting is when you provide educators with capacity building, then this is the kind of growth you can see. So in order to get compelling curriculum, you have to have confident educators. So that's kind of, I just wanted to sort of, I guess, front load a little bit of the work that we're doing and hopefully like stoke a little bit of thinking for you. Feel free to kind of either put your hand up or jump in if you want to ask a question. It doesn't have to be the Nick and Dan show where you only hear our voices. Feel free to I know it's scary, gosh, not everyone has their camera on. That's okay. We support you to be in the darkness. And also if you want to unmute, that's also okay. I back you to unmute and use your raw voice at the same time. So feel free to kind of throw in any of those questions. And in the meantime, I might start with Kayleen's question about the IDEEC project. And then if anybody has any other questions, feel free to jump in at the same time. So the IDEEC project was an interesting one. I've been involved with the Social Enterprise World Forum for a number of years, which is a global convergence of social enterprise around the world. And so the Social Enterprise World Forum was contacted by the University of Amsterdam around who they recommended as leading providers of impact-led entrepreneurship globally. And so before the project was submitted, I was contacted by the lead organisation to kind of, I guess, just chip in with some of the work that we were doing and sort of talk to the frameworks that we were using and the way that we were scaffolding our work. Now, because it's an EU project, there was no expectation on that initial meeting of us having any deep involvement in the project long term. But the work that we're doing, which I'm so incredibly proud of, is actually quite a bit ahead of some of the other providers globally, in the sense that there aren't many organizations that are actually measuring the capability development in the classroom. And so the unique way that we've embedded these capability frameworks within the delivery of these entrepreneurial programs is quite unique globally. And so when they submitted the project, they did so with Australia as an organisation, and the Erasmus Plus grant approved the project delivery with our involvement, despite sitting outside the EU space. So it's been a really exciting place for us to play in contributing to that global piece of work. And also for me personally, also just great professional learning to see the kind of work that's being led around the place. There's a couple of blog articles that I've written about some of the face-to-face engagements. I'll shoot them through in the post-program follow-up from today, because there's some interesting frameworks that are being used by some of these other global participants in the program that I can share at the same time. So.
Excellent. Thanks. I feel it's rare that we look at frameworks across countries as often as we should. So that would be wonderful. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I also just think like there's so much great work happening, and a lot of the time you just have to turn the rock over. We're a big believer in, not reinventing a wheel. So if there's great work being done somewhere else, then why would we rebrand or recreate something just to be able to put our name against it? So this collective genius approach, I think, is really critical to creating robust tools that will stand the test of time. Christina, great question. What are your thoughts on measuring these capabilities? I'm challenged about the linear way. It's a really great question. Is there anything further context-wise you want to add to that thought before I answer?
I will probably get, publicly chastised for this, but
no, do it.
Much happening in Melbourne around these like new metrics and creating another standard to change it. And I really am foundationally, I just can't understand that why we're replacing what doesn't work with what doesn't work. And I think like if you go to industry, no one says you're a 5-point leader or a midway creator. So, and I feel like they're iterative, like I almost imagine them like a drop of water, and they ripple out. The more that you use them and in new contexts that you use them, your level changes. So my question is, how do you actually measure them? Obviously you've got that growth data from your program, but then what do you think about our need to standardize them?
Great question. Firstly, I want to say that it's a really important question that you've asked, and that I don't think you should be fearful of asking a question like that and being chastised for it, because I think asking the question of why we're doing it and is it the right thing to be doing, I think is really, really critical. I really respect the work of the University of Melbourne and the work that they're doing with the new metrics. I've said this to them, so I'm happy to say this here. There's a couple of areas of that work that I feel personally challenged by. The first is that I have this real firm belief that if young people don't own the data and the measurement, then they can't do anything about the data and the measurement. So one of the challenges of the new metrics model is that a lot of the measurement of those capabilities is done by the teacher, almost as a completely additional level of assessment, which when we're talking about a teacher shortage and a crisis in the workforce is not conducive to alleviating load for teachers. I also think it's really complex to ask teachers to notice leveling of capabilities in the classroom, particularly because what if I miss a student doing this beautiful piece of collaboration over here because I'm watching this young person do something super creative over there? And so does that mean that because I miss that student's not really collaborative. And so I don't know, like I think there's a challenge there in accurately assessing from an observational point of view the effectiveness of that capability. And so much of these capabilities is nuanced, right? And contextual, as you've highlighted. So I would say that these are some of the challenges. The other thing is, if I've got a teacher telling me whether I'm good at these things, can I take ownership of the growth and development in these capabilities? So I feel like we're doing this the wrong way around. If the intention of this capability development is to empower young people, then young people should be driving both the measurement and growth of those capabilities in the classroom. And we should be supporting educators to create learning opportunities in the classroom that provide the space and the scaffolding to improve those capabilities. So in the work that we do, each of our capabilities is then broken up into skills that sit underneath them. So I can send you some of the rudimentary questioning tools that we use after today. And so what we do is we ask the students, basically, how confident are you to do this thing? So if you think about, you know, project management, and then one of the skills of project management might be breaking a project down into smaller pieces and then putting them in the order of operations to do them. And so we would say, you know, how confident are you to do this? I can do this all the time under any circumstances. I can do this most of the time. I can do this some of the time with support. I don't know how to do this. I've never seen this before. I don't know what you're talking about. Is this English? And so the students can then look at that thing and go, can I do it? And at what gradient can I do it? Now, complexity, and the first thing that people are going to say is, well, what if students don't know? And the reality is it's okay if they don't know, because if as the educator I'm targeting that capability, I'm going to throw that young person into practice activities that enable them to test their confidence in that particular skill, which means sometimes what we see in this data, high-performing private girls' schools typically self-assess really high. They're like, I've got this, guys. Okay. And so they also super high performing and academic. And so the way to ace the test is to basically say I'm good at all the things. And so they move into this like traditional mindset of testing and self-mark really confidently across all of the assessment instruments. And then what happens is, if I then pull that data and I'm like, you know what, breaking a task into pieces and putting it in order is something that I really think young people struggle with. So if I then drop them into some really explicit skill building practice activities to then test that, then young people do the post program at the end. They're actually going to have the reference material to make a guided decision about where they actually sit. So in some scenarios, we're not actually looking at an increase in the data. What we're looking at is for the final result to be reflective of the actual confidence that young people have in those capabilities. So, and if I know what I suck at and what I'm good at, I can then get better at the stuff I suck at, and also potentially offer that strength to other environments because I know I'm good at other things. So it's the self-knowledge of the young person that's actually more important in this capability building, because they're the ones that are going to have to take these skills into life after school, rather than me as the educator actually ticking boxes about what I've seen or what I've noticed. And so that ownership has to come from the young person. The other thing that I would say is it's physically impossible for you to build 6 capabilities. I think new metrics, oh my gosh, their paperwork makes my head hurt a little bit. Like there's too many. There's no way to teach them all. Like you can't do all of those things in a single unit of work. So what we do with our Activate schools is we benchmark the students at the beginning of the project, and then we sit down with the educator and we go, cool, based on this profile of your cohort, which capability would you like to focus on? And so then what we do is we build a targeted approach to building that chosen capability through that piece of curriculum, which means when I get the impact report at the end, what I'm looking for is targeted increase in the target capability. Okay, so if I get other increases across the others, win. But if this has been the focused capability, I'm actually looking very particularly at the data in this area. Now, you can break that down further and isolate skills under capabilities to focus on, which means, again, when I see the impact data, I'm looking at the growth in a particular target skill. Okay, so where this gets interesting is I can't do all of these in one piece of curriculum. And so this is where whole, at least maybe curriculum area unified approaches to these capabilities is really critical, ideally whole school mapping. of chosen capabilities is really important. Some of the work that we're doing at the moment is we were recipients of 2 pretty decent grants at the back end of last year and at the beginning of this year. And so our next 3 years or 2 years of work is actually building a student platform that young people will be able to log in. They'll build an avatar, of themselves, and then they will go through a learning journey where the activities are tagged through skills under capabilities. And depending on how they perform that challenge, that will actually affect the health bar of their capabilities. So we're almost gamifying the growth of these capabilities of the learner in a digital environment. And so there's 2 reasons for this. One, they'll be able to actually see the impact of the growth in this really visual way. 2, teachers will be able to export that data and actually see the growth of their cohorts. 3, in the work that we do in Activate with this problem to solution, one of the greatest challenges that we have is that teachers don't let go. Okay, they want to control the outcome. And so students, when they're going from problem to solution, if they've picked the right problem to solve and you provide them with the learning journey, they should shoot down that trail. Because if they've picked a problem they care about and they're working with the right people on that problem, all you should be able to do is show them the path and they should be heading down that way. But as teachers, what we often do is we control the pace of the learning. And so we give you this activity and then we make you wait. And then we give you this activity and we make you wait. And that can be demotivating to the momentum of that solutions finding journey. So by digitizing that platform, students will be able to work at the pace that they're working in, which will actually free the teacher up to spend more targeted time with young people or teams that might need more support, and then also not hold back the learners that are ready to go. Now, this has been a development that I've been really reluctant to move down because in some ways my bias as a teacher, I was really fearful of young people sitting in front of a device. What about the power of the educator to build relationships, and we're really important, and don't just put them in front of a platform. But what I've realized is if the teacher does that really important relationship building and the selection of the problem and the scaffolding and the support, by then dropping them into a digital experience, it frees up the teacher to be more differentiated in their approach. And our trials that we've done in classes, the best piece of feedback we got from students was, I didn't have to wait for the teacher to stop yammering before I could start. Quote, love it. And the feedback from teachers, because I thought it might be a bit mixed, but universally the teachers said they preferred the student-led platform experience because it freed them up to work with the young people that needed help. So again, what we're hoping with is the development of this, young people will be able to take ownership of that capability development and actually see the evidence of that growth through these targeted activities. So Christina, does that answer the question? Like, I think you're 100% right about the challenge with new metrics. And I think you're 100% right about this big brother approach to assessing the capabilities in the classroom. I think the more important conversation is how do we empower young people to take ownership of this skill building in the classroom?
Yeah, I loved everything that you said. I often, I think in industry, someone just endorses you. They see it, they endorse it, and you get that affirmation that you've done it. Maybe there's a opportunity in your online platform to build in like some, peer skills, and then micro credential that would be amazing.
Yes,
yeah,
100%. Yeah. And I think
so
that's the power of the learner profile and the micro credentialing, is if it can be linked to things like that. And I think that's the power of that work.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Easy. My pleasure. So entrepreneurial education in the IB curriculum. Shalini, what does the CP stand for? Unpack that acronym for me, just in case I've missed something important.
Hello.
Hello.
Am I audible? Hi.
Yes.
Yeah. So the CP is a career-related program, and it's one of the newest offerings of the IB.
Yes.
It's actually being said to be the new kid on the block, and the program is catching steam all around the world. And I work with a school wherein I'm the coordinator of the program, and the program essentially takes into account student interests for their career-related opportunities. So a school can actually provide for programs based on student interests. Having said that, it's also dependent on the local economy and probably providing for jobs within the in the region that the students come from, and therefore it can be customized, right? So considering that social entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial capabilities are being stressed upon and impressed all around the world, and I come from India, and that's happening here as well. So here is an international education curriculum in my country, which is promoting this program. So I just wanted to understand how, because this whole entrepreneurial education is a new space for me from this perspective. So I was just trying to understand how can I look at developing this thinking, because what you presented and spoke about entrepreneurial education pretty much aligns with what the IB philosophy and vision is. So and so is the age group, because the CP is focused on children or students between 15 to 19.
Perfect.
So I was just and all that you spoke about, whether it's creative thinking, critical analysis, problem solving, all of that are elements of the IB learner profile.
They are, yes. So there's really strong synergy. There's so much I love about the IB. It's that real world, authentic, theme-based context. I think there's great opportunity there. I think the fact that the learner profile, like these attributes, already exist as integral parts of the delivery of the IB. You'll notice if you married like our capabilities against those, you'd see very signal. It's really just language, like they kind of all the same thing. So I think there's really strong alignment in this work in the IB program, 100%. I think it's really interesting. So one of the things that I would say is probably the greatest risk in the work around entrepreneurial capacity building or entrepreneurial education is where we focus on the entrepreneurial product as the purpose of the learning. And so if you imagine this work as a continuum in some ways, you would see curiosity at the beginning. Okay, so young people need to be able to ask curious questions about themselves and the world around them first. So you're never going to be able to solve a problem if you can't ask curious questions to begin with. Now, moving from curiosity, the next kind of stage is then creativity. Okay, so how do we actually look at coming up with maybe creative ideas off the curious question that we have? Now, the next stage on the evolution after that is then the notion of innovation. Okay, so how do we look at that creative solution having a unique value proposition and being innovative in themselves? And then if you move the next stage along, then you would look at entrepreneurship after that. And so then that's the commercialization of the innovative creative idea that stems from the curious problem. So imagine that continuum. So when we're looking at this work, like whether it's in IB for that CP, you don't have to do the entrepreneurship specifically in order to look at curious problems, creative solutions, and innovation. And then you can extend the idea by looking at the commercialization of that idea through revenue. So how can we actually generate profit out the other side? So as a career pathway, the first 3 stages are probably more critical for young people to wrap their heads around, because not all young people will be interested in the commercialization of their ideas. And so the risk when schools are building whole school programs around this is they focus on the entrepreneur. And so they, bring in, I don't know, one provider to do a year 7 program, and the students produce a market. And then they bring in another provider in year 8 and the students produce like an app. And then they bring another provider in year 9 and the students produce like something else. And so it's constantly entrepreneurship. And so by the time the students get to year 9, they put their heads in their hands and you hear those dreaded words, which is, we've already done this. Okay, because it's the repetition of the entrepreneurship without a focus on the evolution from curiosity into creativity into innovation. So I would say with that CP, that would be really valuable, but more like the integration of that more specific entrepreneurial pedagogy would be of value in that place as a pathway option, but only if students have had a chance to flex the muscles in the other 3 phases before they get to that year 10 or that year 11 space. And so how do we actually build that whole school approach where we're privileging the journey of going from curious question to creative solution to viability and innovation through to then commercialization on the other side of that. So yes, very much a fit. In the work that we do, we collect a stupid amount of data. And one of the questions that we ask at the end of our student workshops or our student programs is, are you interested in taking your idea further? Typically about 55% of students are interested in pursuing their idea at the end of a student program. And so what's really interesting for us to think about is it's really critical that we provide these entrepreneurial programs for young people, because 1 in 2 students are interested in taking their idea further. However, if we privilege the entrepreneur and we consistently focus on that, we lose 50% of the cohort each time because they have no drive or interest in pursuing the entrepreneurial product afterwards. So that's why you've got to privilege that enterprising approach rather than necessarily that entrepreneurship. The other thing that I would say is really important is like the rise of, say, the passion project and that sort of work. And I think that's really important if it's framed as maybe a precursor to some of this other work, because we use in our Odyssey, we've got this 10-step framework that takes students from problem to solution. I can show it. Share screen. I can do this. Okay. So this is the Odyssey that we follow to move students from problem to solution. And so what I think is probably most critical to point out is the first 2 steps. The first step is how did I get here? And the second step is what matters to me. So change makers or entrepreneurs or anybody solving complex problems in creative ways, the catalyst for a great solution is choosing a problem that connects to your lived experience or your passions or interests. Now, the greatest disabler to this work in schools is the young person that says, I don't know. What do you care about? I don't know. What are you passionate about? I don't know. What do you want to do in your life? I don't know. And so that apathy to their present state will inhibit them from engaging in that solutions phase. And so if we want to focus on that entrepreneurial venture, like money can be a great catalyst, like young people want to earn cash. So definitely designing a side hustle can be a huge motivator for a young person, but taking cash off the table, which is sometimes not a motivator for young people, the motivator for staying tapped into their entrepreneurial venture is going to be a really tight connection to the problem that they're solving. And so taking the time for young people to understand who they are and the lived experiences that have collided to create the individual that they are, and using those lived experiences as actually really powerful perspectives that make them experts on parts of this world that not everybody knows about. And so this can be particularly powerful for young people that come from potentially disadvantaged communities or at-risk communities where perhaps their personal histories have been weaponized as weaknesses in the past, in order to actually see these challenges as unique pockets of expertise that perfectly place them to be change makers within the world that they live in. And so using that as a catalyst to become, a powerful problem solver to that challenge is really, really important. So I think even in looking at that IB space, I would ask, like, before they get to that year 9, year 10, year 11, what work has been done to unravel who they are in the world and how they show up and what they care about, because that work's going to be a really powerful motivator moving forward as well. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, most certainly, because one of the successes of IB is the fact that there is a continuum and there's a pathway between all the 4 programs. So you start the whole thinking process, much like the way you spoke about curiosity and then creativity, innovation. So we take the journey of building the IB profile right from the first program of PYP culminating.
Yes.
And the curriculum is actually designed backwards with the DP core and DP academics to bring it down to the primary years. So yes, thank you for that, because it does give me certain inways into thinking about how we can look at it, especially with the CP. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Justine, any other question, like any other context you want to provide to your question?
It's more a case of having been in different types of schools across the years, you go through different flavors introduced by different heads. And I have been in a school where we had promoted to us project-based learning.
Yeah.
Luckily enough, I come from the design technology background base. I do that already, but the philosophy I know is completely different.
Mm.
So how do we get the rest of the school on board with this kind of idea of swapping our thinking around to be student-centered and student future-centered rather than tick that box, get that mark, move on to the next stage? And then how can we convince educators that working across curriculums, subject spaces, even year groups is of amazing benefits? Because the real world, as we all know, involves so many different aspects. So why can't we make that a little bit more normalized in school?
Yeah, great question. So I'm conscious of time. I'm going to stay on and answer the question, but if anybody has to depart because they have dinner to make, a drink to pour, feel free to do that while you're on the call. That's totally fine. So do feel free to go, but I am going to jump in and answer this question. I'm happy to kind of continue to answer other questions if they come through at the same time. I think that's a really great question. I think the first thing that I would say is that it's got to come back to what are the strategic objectives of the school and how do we scaffold this, the implementation of whatever intention we have over, I would say, a 3-year period. And so nothing is achieved in a single year within a school. And so the first thing that I would say is I would come back to what is the strategic intent? Okay, so what challenge have we seen? And then what is the solution that we're proposing or the strategic intent that we're proposing? And how do we backward map the implementation of that process 3 years back? Okay, so that's probably the first thing that an executive leadership team needs to do first. The next thing after that, I would say, is in the implementation of any strategic intent, whether that's of a curriculum nature or otherwise, is how do I get the quickest, fastest win for my team that I can then build momentum for? So I think sometimes what we do is we tackle the really hard thing first. And so in the schools that we work with over quite long engagements, Susie from PLC is a school that we're doing some really beautiful work with in WA. We started off with just a whole school staff meeting, and it was about 45 minutes to an hour where we just talked around some of the trends that were happening within the future of education and some of the challenges between what's happening in industry and then what we're seeing in education, and kind of just introduce the why for having to look at things a little bit differently first. And then what we did was invite educators that were interested to engage in a 1-day or it was a 2-session curriculum design process. So they could turn up with a piece of curriculum and I walked them through a framework where they would take the piece of curriculum that they had and kind of reimagine it from there. Now, why this was a super supportive way to start was by starting with the why. So rather than what we're going to do and how you're going to do it, I'm actually going to talk about why this piece of work is really important for us as a school. And more importantly, why it's really important for our young people, because educators become educators because they care about kids. And so if you can show them why this work is really important for young people, first and foremost, most educators want to do the right thing by the kids that they're teaching. So let's start with that first. Then what we did is created the space for the early adopters who felt ready to tap into that next piece of work. Okay, so we didn't mandate it or force it for the whole team. We kind of enabled that really easy win for the early adopters to jump in. And so what we saw was we'd anticipated the junior school only coming along to that experience. And actually there was a whole bucket of people from the secondary school that opted in because they were really excited about the opportunity. And then that enthusiasm and success then fed further engagement from there. And so what we're looking at with that leadership team is like, what's the long view here? Okay, we don't need to solve every challenge, every piece of curriculum in every part of the school. Let's actually think about this like a 3-year relationship and work backwards at a pace of change, okay, that is supportive of the complexities that exist in schools, because I can't change everything at once right now, okay? So how do I do these small incremental shifts that are very a hands-on for teachers and teaching teams that have payoff for teachers really quickly. So they can learn a thing, do a thing, and then see the outcome of that thing. And then that feeds momentum. So I would say that that's, broadly speaking, the best way to do it. I actually don't think the pedagogy matters, okay, or what the strategic change initiative matters, because I would say that that should be developed off the back of your school context. Okay, so who are you as a school? What do you as a school and what does your community value? And then how do you build the right pedagogy that fits around the kind of education that you want to offer for your school? So project-based learning for me, love it. As an educator, it fits really neatly with my philosophy and way of teaching, but that's not necessarily going to be the best fit for every school, okay? So it's about also considering your context and your community, and then also then considering the strategic intent that's going to work within that community at the same time. Now, we could spend about 2 hours talking about this. So does that kind of give a snapshot of process, at least to begin with?
Yeah.
But I think the critical thing for me is pick the early adopters. So if you've got a faculty or a department or a year level that is like ready, you know what I mean? Like they need to be let off the chain because they're so excited by this work and really want to have a crack at it, then provide that team with the support and the scaffolding, and then track their progress, collect the data, okay, measure the impact, share and showcase the work, and then over a period of time, start to evolve. The other thing that I would say is make the work really action oriented. So I would say one of the strengths of our professional learning is it's like, okay, here's the framework. I'm going to take you through the step. Now here's time in your team to do the thing. And then I'm going to take you through the next step in the framework. Now sit with your team and do the thing. Here's the next step and do the thing. So it's not listening to me, you know, for 8 hours talking. They're with the piece of curriculum in front of them, actioning the learning in real time. So when they walk away from the professional learning experience, they have evidence of their efforts that they can then implement in the classroom. Because the worst thing about professional learning is walking out at the end of the day, potentially feeling excited and buzzed, but feeling stressed about when you're going to get the time to actually action the learning. Okay. And then what happens is the lag between the learning and the action actually disables any implementation. And so you've got to make it easy for the thing to happen after the thing. Ooh, Kayleen, great question around, anyway, feel free to, this is the problem with Request-a-thon. I worked with, I don't know if anybody in the room is from the school. I worked with a school in Brisbane recently and we ran Request-a-thon as a 45-minute session at the end of the day. And the principal came in an hour and 45 minutes later because she didn't understand where we all were, and all of the staff at 4:45 in the afternoon were still in the Request-a-thon room, still answering questions. So this could go on a long time. Feel free to depart anytime you want, but I'm going to keep answering questions as they come up. Difference in the uptake of or outcomes in across that regional and then metro. Really great question. I think fundamentally, it doesn't really matter what state or system we work in. I would say the capability, if I talk about capabilities first, the capability of least confidence is usually creativity across any school of setting. I don't see a lot of variance across systems or settings when it comes to. I think that's because a lot of us attach our confidence around creativity to our to the performing arts, so how good we are as artists or musicians. And so we have quite a complex relationship to creativity if we're not particularly great artists. And so that seems to filter into, I think, our creative confidence and our creative thinking strengths. So I would say that that's common across those things. When it comes to outcomes in a regional setting in Australia, I would say one of the complexities, particularly at the moment, is the high turnover of staff. And so it's really complex to do this work in schools, where in some of the schools that we work with, there could be, you know, 3 or 4 different teachers who are moving in and out of a single class setting over the course of 12 months. So I would say that maybe the uptake and outcomes are not that different between regional or metro, but maybe the sustainability and depth of outcomes might be affected by some of the complexities to do with staffing in those regional settings. So I would say that's probably more indicative than probably any significant shifts in the capability as such, or some of the impact of the work there. Any other questions? I'm so good that I've just like answered everything that you could possibly want to know. I mean, I'll take it if that's the case, like 55 minutes and I've nailed it, win-win. What I might finish off with in the last couple of minutes is there a resource or a piece of research or a learning that you would like me to include in the post-session follow-up? If so, do you want to drop like your wish list of maybe research, resourcing, curiosities into the chat, and I will use that as a reference point when I build the email that I send out after this. The other thing is, when you get the email, if you have something that you think about afterwards, like feel free to kind of hit reply, and I'm very happy to kind of shoot you any resourcing that we have or any other research that I can get my hands on at the same time. Thanks for listening to me for 56 minutes. That's I appreciate it very much, and thanks for, I think, just your engagement across the course of the session. I hope Request-a-thon was helpful. I hope there was something out of today's session that you've been able to take away. And please, you know, reach out if there's any way that we can support you and support your schools. Like I constantly say that, you know, we exist to be in service to education. So any way that we can show up and contribute, like that's why we exist here. So on behalf of Dan, who took the lead for a good 6 minutes or so while I tried to get back into the room, well done, sir. And also on behalf of myself, thanks so much for your time today, everyone. And I look forward to our next live learning session. We might maybe do some more of these where we can keep it super agile and reflective and responsive. So have a great afternoon. All the best for term 2. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you next time.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.